Hello and welcome to the November 2022 ENSO seminar. We are very fortunate today to be joined by Miguel Sepulveda from UNAM in Mexico. And we're very much looking forward. Miguel's work has sort of came to my attention a couple of years ago, partly on the basis of comments from others that your presentation, Miguel, of the core ideas of enaction is some of the clearest in the business. You do a sort of a very good job of sort of getting what are often very difficult and counterintuitive points across. But I'm sort of particularly excited by very much just the title of your talk, situating enactive cognition, looking at it in terms of its place, both in terms of physical and social environment and also historical context. So before we get going, I will do our customary sort of quick commercial break, just to give a chance for those people watching live to catch up and to maybe not throw ourselves too deep into things before people come online to the live stream. I know you're going to start with an ad or with a sort of a presentation, or so I'll do my bit first so that we can just go straight into your slides, if that's okay. Just one thing that I want to share with people, that many of the community who watch these videos will be very interested in, I think, and of course many people will know because some of them are already at it, is there's a meeting going on in the Embodied Cognition Unit of the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology at the moment. And there are a number of excellent speakers there, and researchers, philosophers, cognitive scientists, psychologists. And it looks like, to be honest, I've never wanted to be in Japan more than I do now. But unfortunately, can't make it there in person, but it is possible to watch live. So if you have an interest in the ENSO seminars, you will almost certainly be interested in the live stream of the ECOGS 2022 meeting that's going on in Okinawa there. So, okay, so I'll sort of stop that bit and we'll bring ourselves back to the here and now, despite the fact that here is indeed spread over several continents. Miguel comes to us from the Autonomous University in Mexico, having completed doctoral studies in the University of Montreal on putting enactive theory in its place, in a way. So you're very welcome, Miguel. I'm very glad that you're here. I'm very much looking forward to the talk. And so I will, at this point, I guess, invite you to present to us the November 2022 ENSO seminar.
Thank you very much, Mark, for your invitation and for this great opportunity to share my work. So, well, I will start by a little advertising in here, like saying that some of the ideas I will present in here are already present in this approximate publication of the book Enactive Cognition in Place, and most of all from a phenomenological perspective. But today's talk will be looking at a different perspective, but referring to the same sort of phenomenon. So, well, was just my talk today will be focused on how it is possible to refine and enlarge this concept of sense making, that it's quite important for the enactive approach, and widening our perspective and include what I said are the neglected depth of the ecological and historical aspects of life and cognition viewed from this enactive perspective. And I think we can have a more situated definition of sense making if we incorporate to the theoretical framework of the enactive approach the concepts of norm development and transverse emergence I will refer now in this presentation. So, well, let's review about what is enaction and sense making. Originally, well, enactive cognition was born in a position to cognitivists who think of cognition as information processing, and instead, enactivists hold that cognition is not the representation of a pre-given world by a pre-given mind, but it is rather the enactment of a world and a mind on the basis of a history and the variety of actions of a being in the world performs. And well, the basic idea of an action is that, well, this being in the world can be modeled as an autonomous system that interacts with its surroundings, and through a structural coupling starts bringing forth meaning in the environment. We referred with the idea of an autonomous system is a system that has operational closure. The concept of operational closure refers to a network of processes whose activity produces and sustains the very elements that constitute the network. That is, there is an interdependence of the processes. If one of the processes fails, others start failing, and the whole unity will be lost. So the operational closure will be lost. And the idea of a structural coupling refers to how these autonomous systems interact with a material environment, and through time, through processes of self-organization, starts creating regular patterns of interaction. So the system becomes responsive to some aspects of the environment and not to others. So to illustrate this idea of inaction, we have the constitution of the autonomous systems, thanks to its operational closure, that interacts with a material environment, and through structural coupling starts enacting a meaningful world. This idea evolved later in the concept of sense-making. The concept of sense-making is nested in the theory of biological autonomy that defines living systems as autonomous systems that have this operational closure, but that are always in a precarious condition because they are subject to entropy, and they can lose their organization, the decay of their materials. So they have the intrinsic purposiveness or intrinsic teleology to preserve the viability of its own autonomous organization. And for that, they need to be open to the environment, so they are operationally closed, but thermodynamically open, and these interactions with the environment need to be adaptive, and they need to modulate their behavior to interact with the environment. And that is precisely where the notion of sense-making comes to the picture, because sense-making involves the emergence of meaning in the environment and of the normativity that guides these interactions between the agent and the environment that constitute what Wexkull called the Umwelt, or what is relevant for the living organism. And Thompson told us that this happened at the same time as a co-emergence of the self-identity of the autonomous systems and this meaningful world. So we can identify three main aspects of sense-making here. Something that Varela called a surplus of significance, this sort of meaning that appears in the environment according to the autonomous constitution of the living organism. We have the co-emergence of self and a meaningful world in these interactions of the autonomous system with the environment. And we have the emergence of normativity as in nature as something that regulates these interactions of the agent and the environment, and not only laws of nature. So in this picture, we have this of sense-making. We have the synchronic constitution of the agent environment system, the emergence of the autonomous system that interacting with the environment will constitute also a meaningful environment, and that is the act of sense-making. But the point is, what happened with this diachronical dimension of sense-making? Well, probably we need to keep appealing to the notion of structural coupling, although it's like more in the background in later developments of the enactive approach. But they are present in other forms, like in the reference to the Piaget's theory of equilibration, where we have how sensory motor agent adapt their already constituted sensory motor habits, which involves also an operational closure of the sensory motor coordinations, like in the case of a baby that sucks milk from the breast of her mother, but that need to readapt their sensory motor norms, their interactions with the environment, in order to respond to a different forms of sucking from the bottle. So we have more or less the same picture we had it in the original version of enaction, where a material environment is causing perturbations in the agent environment system that will be readapted. And it is precisely the aim of maintaining the viability of the autonomous system, what will direct this adapting to the perturbations caused by the material environment. But what happened if we think about what I call situated enactive normativity? Well, when we refer to the sort of normativity at play in the enactive approach, we refer to norms of self-maintenance, that is, that which purpose is to maintain the viability of the autonomous system, like the organism of the sensory motor agent. So we have like this sort of intention to maintain this autonomy, and these perturbations are assimilated in order to still maintain the viability of the system. However, we also have phenomena like that one pointed by Rietveld in his work following Wittgenstein about how we have normative constraints that do not pertain to the self-maintenance of individuals, but that refers to standards constituted socially that we already respond to in our sociocultural practices. There, we have that the agent environment, the constituted agent environment system face not only perturbations of the material environment, but also constraints produced by the instituted social norms. So we may have like the sense-making norm involves something more than the self-maintenance. To understand the difference of how an agent faces the a material environment and socially constrained environment or a social material environment, we can think about a piano that has many possibilities for action for an agent. Like, for instance, I can stand up in a piano to getting the attention of people, but in the context of making music with the piano, like in a concert of music, well, the skilled agent will know how to interact properly with the piano according to the social norms of that practice. So we have a reduced number of possibilities for action that precisely constitute this relation between the agent and the environment, not only responding to these material constraints of the environment, but also to the normative constraints of the sociocultural practice. So we have the picture of an agent environment system already immersed in a social material environment that is constituted not only by its materiality, but also by the current norms. Well, the notion of participatory sense-making already offers some clues about that there is something more than the autonomy of individuals to constitute certain norms of sense-making. We have, for instance, the example of a couple dancing, where we have this sensory motor coordination of each individual that need to coordinate to an emergent social or intercorporeal system. So each individual needs to make sense in order to respond to this emergent system. There we have an intercorporeal norm that is constituted by something more than the autonomy of individuals. But what happens with the social material environment? Well, there, I think we have to refer to what I call normative ecological fields, because our relation with the environment is not only determined by those possibilities for action that the environment offers to agents, to skilled agents. First of all, when we face the environment, we already know how to in some way relate to this environment. For instance, if I don't know anything about music, if I don't know anything about how to play the piano, I still can find ways to hit like the keys of the keyboard of the piano and produce like some sort of noises. But probably I won't be able to do anything else. But if I start acquiring knowledge, I know the chords, the scales or pages necessary, then the environment starts affording different possibilities for action or affordance in the terminology of ecological psychology. So from this basis, the relevant part is not only that it offers me opportunities for action, but also opportunities for inaction, because it is from this basis that we can start building new patterns, like it is referred by the work of Sun now in how develop these skills in playing the piano. And we have different moments, different stages of development in the constitution of these sensory motor norms until we finally are able to actually play music. And the point is not only that we have this mirroring between the skills of an agent and the affordance in the environment, but also that we need having or these precedent structures in the environment to make possible the enactment of new forms of sense. So we have here some sort of dialectics between the social material environment and the already constituted agent environment system that will lead the system to a new reconfiguration, and not only self-maintenance constitute this sort of norms. And we can observe the same phenomenon not only in the sociocultural activities of humans, but also in some biological species, like in the typical example of ants that interact according to their own autonomy, but this autonomy depends also on the emergent coordination with other ants. And this coordination is also related to how to build their niche, the ant hill. So there is also this sort of dialectical interaction between the constitution of these autonomous systems, the emergent coordinated systems, and the social material environment in time. So for a very open definition of situated enactive normativity, I would say that in addition to the material constraints of the agent environment system and the normative constraints of self-maintaining norms, there are typically ecological constraints historically enacted in the past of the agent environment system that constitute the normativity of the agent environment system in the present. And that leads me to think of sense-making as norm development. Norm development discards the abstract scenario where sense-making is a process of emergence of norms from a previously non-normative and purely material landscape. Sense-making is instead the transformation and reconfiguration of the normative domain that is already constraining the interactions of an agent environment system. Such a definition of sense-making acknowledges that an agent sediment and its environment are always linked by a historical past that is sedimented in the present constraints of the system, like in the sensory motor skills and sedimented in the structures of the environment. So there is one more invariant constitutive aspect of the agent environment system, the layer of normative constraints that were previously enacted in the historical development of the system. So to illustrate this, we can see how the agent and the environment are related by some current norm, but that it's possible only insofar as there were previously another old norm from where this present norm emerged. And that also offers the possibility of enacting new norms and these new self-identities and new micro-worlds that correspond to the new self-identity. To clarify a little bit more this conception of sense-making, I propose to make use of the notion of transverse emergence. When we talk about emergence in the context of the enactive approach, we are referring to what Chalmers called weak emergence. We are not committed to discussions about the impossibility of reducing explanation of consciousness to the psychochemical activity of the brain, for instance. That would be like a case of strong emergence. But most of all, that we cannot fully explain and predict a phenomenon because we do not know, or maybe we could never know all the variables that fully explain its occurrence. And that's the more typical and practical use of the notion of emergence in dynamical systems theory, not with ontological commitments. And well, to understand what I am going to say, let's just make reference to some basic ideas about dynamical systems. That dynamical systems are systems that change over time. Some of the systems, for some of the systems, we cannot predict the behavior using differential equations alone. So we need to appeal to graphical interpretations. And the behavior of the system is illustrated in an abstract space where their variables that constitute or that are relevant for our model of the system are drawn in what we call the phase space. Through processes of self-organization, dynamical systems tend to form patterns of behavior. These patterns of behavior are mathematically and graphically represented by attractors, and the stable patterns of behavior of a system are represented by a landscape of attractors in the phase space of a system. We have many different sort of dynamical self-organizing systems like whirlpools, like tornadoes, floods that can be modeled in this way. When we refer more specifically to the idea of emergence in the context of enactive approach, Thompson refers to emergence as co-emergence, which refers to how the whole not only arises from the organizational closure of the parts, but the parts also arise from the whole. So Thompson is mainly referring to how the autonomous system is constituted by its parts, but these parts that constitute the operational closure of the system depends on precisely the constitution of the whole, because it is only through the activity of the part that the whole persists, but also the persistence of the whole is what constrains the behavior and makes possible the existence of this part. So there is a mutual co-emergence and mutual specification of each other. This idea is not only applied to the emergence of the body itself, but also to the emergence of a world, since there is a process of co-emergence of the agent and this meaningful environment. And that is precisely what sense-making is trying to describe, and this according to what Thompson says in his Mind in Life. So we have this mutual co-determination and mutual co-specification in cases of the self, of a bacteria responding to chemical compounds, or in the cases of a sensory motor agent responding to the affordances in the environment. In this context, I want to refer to the work of Jean Protevi that distinguish between three different aspects of emergence that we can that can illustrate enactive ideas. This three-dimensionality of emergence refers to the idea of synchronic emergence that correspond mostly to what Thompson described as this mutual co-emergence of whole and parts, and that reflects the stability of the system, and that we can illustrate by the stable landscape of attractors of a dynamical system, the relations between parts and wholes. So we have this process of synchronic emergence in the constitution of the autonomous system, and also in the constitution of the relation of the agent and the environment as a coupled system. We have the case of diachronic emergence, where this stability, this synchronic stability can be altered because of perturbation, like how the material environment causes perturbation in this stability of the system, and cause the reconfiguration of this relation between parts and whole. And that can be modeled as these changes in the landscape of attractors over time, like we have in the example of development systems applied to sensory motor development, the work of Thelen and Smith, for example. And of course, we also have this idea at work in these enactive concepts of structural coupling and Piaget's theory of equilibration. But we can also have this idea of transverse emergence, where we have the agent already immersed in this normative field, where we already have this constituted landscape of attractors and immersed in social material environments that already comprises the norms at work and not only the material part. So in this case, what we have is some sort of a break inside the system that will be caused by the social material environment or by the instabilities inside the agent environment system or the autonomy of the agent. So we have a process of reconfiguration of the whole system because of the appearance of these times of discoordination, of metastability, that can lead precisely the system to a reconfiguration of a new whole. So what we have in this picture is like a new whole emerging from an older whole, and not like something external causing perturbations from the outside of the system. So we can illustrate this by changes in the already given landscape of attractors into a new landscape of attractors of the environment system. An example I like always to refer about this sort of processes is the case of jazz improvisation, for instance, where we have this balance between custom and novelty, where there is the intrinsic purpose of creating novel ways to do all the standards, all phrases of music. And we have the autonomy of each individual interacting with the environment. We have the emergent coordinated system between the individuals, but we also have this pertinence of the system to the social material environment that relates to, for instance, the way they play their instruments, the instruments itself, the social-cultural expectations, personal lives of each of the musicians, and all these elements that attach the system to their history and to this wide ecological dimension. So in here we have some sort of novelty that emerged from the internal dynamics of the system that push the system into a new configuration, but it is not something external that is causing necessarily this change. So these ideas of norm development and transverse emergence led me to think about a situated definition of sense-making. So the definition of sense-making would entail that sense-making involves the transformation of a pre-given normative framework that already links the agent and the environment normatively and meaningfully. Hence, there is already a surplus of significance in the environment that suffers a reconfiguration due to the activity of a living organism. Sense-making, yes, describes the co-emergence, but it's a transversal co-emergence of a self in a meaningful world that is the pre-given, that is, the pre-given identities of the self and the world suffer a reconfiguration of the synchronic structure that mutually co-determines their new identities, thanks to diachronic processes of transformation that cut across the whole agent-environment system. And finally, sense-making entails the development of the enactive situated normativity that typically characterizes the domain where agent's action happens, and that it's no longer like the emergence of nature, of normativity in nature. I think this version that I would call sense-making in the wild would be similar to what Hutchins was intending when they criticized cognitivism, not only because they falsely localize all the relevant causes of cognition in the human brain, but because their study methods commonly isolated the cognitive phenomena in the control environments of laboratories. So cognition in the lab impeded cognitive scientists from observing how an individual cognition is often, if not always, entangled with the cognition of other agents and the use of material, technological, and symbolic resources of sociocultural environments. In the same spirit, I encourage enactivists to endorse the enlarged conception of sense-making in the wild when the study of a process of life and cognition requires such a view, because maybe not always this enlarged view is required. So let's just think briefly about the proposal of, for illustrate an example of Fuchs, when they refer to how psychiatry traditionally intend to intervene in the brain activity from a more reductionist perspective, intervening in the physicochemical activity of the brain. That it's could be a useful way of intervention, but that it's often incomplete. So we need to at a personal level of intervention that comprises these intersubjective, motor, and biological interactions between an agent and the environment, between a person and their socio-cultural environments. But I think this intervention could be seen not only in terms of how this individual is related or to this already established framework, but we need to think about how this framework, these social-cultural environments are constituted with their enactive situated normativity. So maybe what we need to look at is how it is constituted, this enactive situated normativity, and probably we need to intervene at that level. So for instance, in how this global pandemic of depression that is more and more recurrent in our Western societies, as referred by the World Health Organization, well, it could be precisely a problem that doesn't have to be with the individualities or even with the close communities, but with a wide, really wide system, social material system, and the enactive situated normativities at work in these systems. So just to conclude, let's say that the traditional conception of sense-making neglects the depth of the ecological and historical dimensions of life and cognition. The neglect of this depth is founded on the limited conception of normativity and emergence enactivists typically hold. I have shown that we can think of sense-making norms as enactive situated norms. Such a normative view discloses the ecological and historical depth of enactive cognition. From this basis, we can infer that sense-making is not a process that entails emergence of normativity from a non-normative and purely material landscape, but a process of transformation and reconfiguration of the normativity at play in the interactions of the agent-environment system. Therefore, sense-making is a process of norm development. So the concept of transverse emergence makes possible to think about operationalizing norm development as a dynamical process of reconfiguring the landscape of attractors of the agent environment system. So together, norm development and transverse emergence enlarge the concept of sense-making, constituting a new definition of sense-making, the notion of sense-making in the wild, and this notion can afford new possibilities for thinking about how cognitive and biological phenomena happen in complex field of actions from the standpoint of the enactive approach. So just to close with this brief quotation from Turing that's saying that most of organism, most of the time is developing from one pattern to another rather than from homogeneity into a pattern. And that's it. Thank you.
Superb. Thank you very much, Miguel. There's a lot of richness there, and I have to say, I'll jump straight through. I pretty much agree across the board with everything that you've just said. I think it's a kind of a crucial and important point. So I will hold myself back at that point because there are other people here and other voices than my own are always a better place to start. So I will invite those of you who are attending with us live, if you would like to come in, just I guess make yourselves known. For those of you who are watching the live stream, you can throw comments into the chat there, and I will sort of fling it into the discussion. I guess give the opportunity to someone who's present first, and there's a couple of comments in the chat that I'll relay in once the opportunity arises. Does anyone want to go first there? Laura.
Well, thank you, Miguel. It was very clear, very rich and very clear explanation. I do have a couple of, well, first I want to start with a comment, and is that I love the notion of sense-making in the wild. I think it's very nice to be so explicit of putting in the wild. And it even reminds me not only of the person that you quoted, but even Wittgenstein was very worried about that. And that's why he came to the second version of his thought. So yeah, so that's very nice. But yeah, so I have a couple of questions. The first one is that it seems that the notion of norm development that you're defending always implies changes, right? So there's always a change, and then that's why it's developing. And you also mentioned that there is a mutual co-emergence between self and world. And I don't know, it may be that I'm lacking the details, but wouldn't it be a problem for the notion of self? I mean, how would you account for the continuity of self over time if there is always a change and always a perturbation? How would you do that? That's my first question. And the other question I have is that I can see that there is a difference between the enactive situated normativity that you're defending and the notion of habits that is already important in the enactive tradition. And I was wondering if you can say a couple of words about that, about what's the difference and how you see habits fitting, or yeah, what's your position on that?
Okay, thank you, Laura, for your comments and questions. And yeah, well, I think that I'm not sure if your first comment is in that sense, but I think it's important, an important clarification. I did not made in here, but I pretend to do, about this idea of norm development, because the picture I am drawing is a very dynamic one, and probably like facing always like instabilities in the environment, in the agent, that we cannot refer always as they're always enacting new norms. We probably need to refer to reenacting and enacting norms. But that depends precisely, I think, in how there is this reconfiguration, for instance, in the landscape of attractors, because not all the perturbations of a dynamical system causes these perturbations in the landscape of attractors. So there are only some significant ones that will cause these changes and will cause, properly say, this norm development. What I like of the notion still of norm development is precisely pointing to this dynamical description of these norms. We also need to have a view where we are understanding that each time we are facing the environment, it is some sort of different condition. Even if we have these acquired habits, these regular patterns of interaction, we are always adapting to the new circumstances because the environment is always changing. But only sometimes we are pushed to create a new norm. I think we can do this in terms of, or imagine this how happen in terms of dynamical systems. Probably we need a little bit of conceptual refinement in the notion to talk about when there is a whole new norm and not just an old norm, but maybe like a reform of the norm, and instead of having really a change in the configuration of the agent environment system. The second thing, well, yeah, I understand your concern about this continuity and discontinuity between the self and the world. The original picture of the enactive approach is having these multiple selves that react according to the particular context where they are situated. It's from this vision that I am referring to this emergence of self and world, or a new self, or having this new identity, in the way that we have a new, for instance, in the body, a new bodily self-organization to face a particular task. And probably, well, related to the other question is like, well, we probably need a criteria when we have like a new self and having a new world, because a whole new norm is now enacted. To the other problem, like how we have this continuity in time of the self. Well, I think we need some other resources to think about it. Probably it's another part that is lacking in the enactive approach, because it is so much focused in precisely this diversity, and in some way in yes, the situatedness of the self in the world, that we need to offer best explanations of this continuity of a single self, even if we change of environment, even if we change in time with acquiring different habits and modes of interaction with the environment. For your third question, I am not exactly sure what you are asking when you're asking about habits, what I think about it.
Well, yeah, I was thinking that there is this notion of habits. Sorry to cut. There is this notion of habits that is in the enactive tradition, where habits are part of what constitutes your identity, right? Your sensory motor identity, and there is some social-cultural component in this notion of habits. And I was wondering if you have thought about it. I mean, if you think that there is some connections there, some continuities or disruptions. I mean, you don't have to, but
No, probably what you are trying to point to is the fact that the picture of the sensory motor agent facing the environment alone is indeed also an abstract picture, because I think there are always this influence of other people, even and not only for human beings, but also for many living organisms. They are always interacting with other organisms, and that helps to constitute their way to relate with the rest of the environment. So yeah, I definitely agree with you if you are thinking that, and the social part is always there.
Yeah, I agree. So one last thing, and then I let others speak. And the first thing that you were discussing about change and stability in urban development made me maybe remember a discussion in sociology about change and permanence. So there, maybe we can talk about it later at some other point. But there is, when you have the notion of society in terms of practices, like they're very much like these dynamical systems that are self-preserving, and then you have the question on when do you have a real change and when do you have a stability, and it's not an easy question to answer. So I would say that maybe it will be interesting to combine forces there with sociology and social sciences to address this question. That was
Yeah.
Thank you, Miguel. It was very interesting.
And thank you for your question.
Very good. Okay, so I'll relay one comment in from the chat, and then if Peter or Jorge would like to say anything, you can just come in at that point. This is just a point raised by Ezekiel Di Paolo in the chat here. You just said, great talk, Miguel. Could you say more about the surplus of significance in the environment you mentioned? It's that quote from Varela. It goes on, seems to me that the transformation of sense-making entails the individuation, selection, or noticing of environmental patterns that were not significant before. A surplus of significance entails that somehow they were significant but not noticed. So I'm not sure which one you mean. So if maybe just unpack or parse the notion of this surplus of sense-making. Sorry, surplus of significance.
Yeah. Well, indeed, the notion of surplus of significance is very interesting because it is, I think, it's more deep than we can think prima facie, because we can imagine that Varela is talking about how precisely this there is emergence of meaning in nature. And I don't think that's the exact way Varela is thinking about it, because for that, enactivism would be like having some realist commitments about how nature is as it is described by physics and chemistry. But for enactivists, well, the material world described by physics and chemistry is just a practical way to think about it, based in our own embodiment, in our own cultural traditions. So when we refer to the surplus of significance, I think we're also thinking in a practical way. Of course, Varela is pretending to have some continuity between this material landscape described by physics and chemistry and this new level that emerged that needs to be explained in a different way, appealing to these other notions. But this does not necessarily means like this emergence of something in nature, precisely in the way I was referring as some sort of a strong case of emergence. So when we think about what is before this first emergence of meaning or of the constitution of an autonomous system, we need to think that we are referring in a practical way of how we are understanding our explanations and how they are useful to build this continuity that, well, precisely the enactive approach aims to have these natural explanations of phenomena. So, well, I haven't thought about this particular idea or not well enough of this particular idea of individuation that comes overall from the Simondon works. But, well, I think we can think usefully about that part, but I think precisely we are referring in an interesting way in how we are attaining this part where nature comes like in the realm of life, in the realm of cognition. We of course there is always this question about, well, if we have always this norm development, we can have some infinite regress. And well, of course, the first organisms that emerged were not preceded by a full-fledged norm, but certainly they were preceded by other forms of self-organization. Already there were some other structures in the environment that could refer to these processes of individuation that comes from matter to biological systems and to social systems, and etc. I guess I hope that it's good for Ezekiel. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great, Miguel. If there's a reply, I'll forward it back in. I want to follow up on a couple of things, but I know Peter's been waiting to come in, so I'll let Peter. Were you looking to?
Hi, Miguel.
Hi.
I don't know that we've ever met. I did my doctoral work in the 80s on self-organization in perceptive coordination action systems. I ended up going into neuroscience shortly after that. So I haven't been part of the ongoing discussion. You know, I have sympathies both to the internalist views. So I worked on the auditory system and the neural coding of pitch, for example. So I have sympathies that lie both with the enactivists and Gibsonians on one hand, and the internalist neurophysiology, functional neuroscience view of emerging structures within the brain that cope with the world. And so I think your framework is great, and it's very clear, and I enjoyed your talk. The only thing I would say is that I think that there's a complementarity between the internalist views and the mechanisms of self-organization within the brain and externalist factors, situations, embodiments, and the two perspectives illuminate different aspects of the interaction between an organism and its environment, or an organism and its social context. So great work, and I'm looking forward to seeing your book. You might want to put that in the chat, actually, how to get it, and that's my main comment about it. I also think that the jazz improvisation is not the greatest example of emergence. I distinguish between combinatorial emergence, which is somewhat like Piagetian assimilation. You're operating within the same state space of possibilities, and creative emergence, which is where you're enlarging the state space, increasing the number of attractors, And that's sort of analogous to Piagetian accommodation. And jazz improvisation, is they practice the changes and the riffs that they're going to do. So it is creative in the sort of combinatorial way, but not really in terms of changing the nature of the state space. They stay within their tonal frameworks. So that's just a minor quibble. Anyway, great work though.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. Nice to meet you, and thank you a lot for your comments. And well, I think you're right about this idea of considering this internal dynamics of the brain as well as these external parts, because I think they are complementary. I think this is the best way to think about it. That's precisely what I was referring with the Fuchs idea of interfering in cases of mental disease at different levels. But precisely what I am trying to say is that we can even go wider and to look for where is the origin of these mental diseases. And well, thank you very much also for the comment on the jazz improvisation because it's a good example that I found from a phenomenological perspective. There are already also some works on synergetic systems and jazz improvisation. But yeah, probably I will say your comment in that there is no really a change in the attractors. So probably that's related with Laura's question about when we are changing the norm and when we are not really changing. But yeah, thank you a lot.
The Dadaists are the ones that were changing the frame, and or the change in music from tonal to atonal. That's sort of a frame change where you're introducing a whole nother way of listening. I think that's a better example of a sort of creative emergence than jazz improv. But I like jazz, nothing wrong with it. But what they're doing is not as emergent as you might think.
Yeah, well, actually, the big picture and this idea is, well, like we have this dynamics in the improvisation, but also that this practice in the long run will define, for instance, the style of a band. So we are like having this emergence of new attractors that can lead that band to have a particular style. So I think when we are having this new sort of emergence of styles in a group or later in a community or bigger communities, maybe we are referring to what I am trying to say with the idea of transverse emergence.
Yeah, good, great.
Thank you.
It seems almost like the Bernsteinian repetition without repetition notion, except that it's happening at multiple scales. That that there's the performance of any individual melody will not quite be exactly the same every single time, but also there'll be within an improvisation performance, there will be sort of similar levels. It won't be the same thing, but it will be the same genre perhaps, or the same style or frame. So it'll be, I guess, there'll be an interesting thing to look at. There might be the time scale at which these different scales of norm might change. If they are, the immediate is quick and the cultural is short. But that said, sort of scales never obey those nice simple categories too easily. I think they sort of blend into another bit. I did want to ask you, and this might be a very mean one to finish on, so I'm a little bit wary, and you please tell me to just like, do you know what, Marek, let's do that another time. I'd be quite happy to say that. But given that the word norm has been used substantially, and the fact that it's, the norm is the thing that's changing, but also the things that staying the same, and it's carrying a big load here. Can I ask you to tell me what you mean by it? because I'm just wondering, particularly when we got as far as the emergence of life, and you're saying, well, look, there's no norms yet, but there is self-organization. I'm just starting to wonder whether is there anything to the notion here that isn't just asymmetry, or you know, that it's just anything that's going in a particular direction. You know, would we characterize gravity as a norm, or why wouldn't we? You know, where does the boundary, or is there a boundary, or how do we negotiate that boundary? That's, like I said, it's a big fuzzy question, and if Jorge's got a more specific one, we'll go with that one. But I'm just curious if you have you know, is there a definition of norm that you're particularly keeping in mind, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. It's a very big question, because how we can make difference, for instance, between norms, rules, laws of nature. I think the most common use probably in here, like fulfilling some sort of expectations, where, well, it depends what we are referring to expectations, but in the context of the enactive approach, is like fulfilling the expectation of maintaining this purpose of viability. We also have the reference of perception of norms, where the norm is like the expectations of how the object, the visual object, will respond to my movements. I can fail and in fulfilling the norm, and then we are in a case of illusion. In the case of the biological normativity, we can fail to fulfill those expectation standards for the stability, and well, we have problems for the autonomous system that can lead to disease, death, or something like that, or we can lose also our habits if we lose an important part of that constitute the system. In the case of social norms, we are referring to this expectation generated by this social group, what we are trying to fulfill. We incorporate in some way, because we do not need necessarily the presence of others. But I agree that from some other perspective, like we are referring to for instance, regularities in patterns of behavior. So what we are talking about, we're talking about laws, we're talking about norms, and what would make a difference? Well, probably, yes, there is some work to do there. And well, here's for Laura and I another way to explore further work in normativity and in activism. Yeah.
We can certainly look forward to that. So there's just another question thrown in, actually. Would you like to ask it aloud? Or okay, it's too much noise there. So two quick questions. So what are the mainly evolutionary processes that generate new normativity? And in this context, which is the relationship between ontogeny and phylogeny?
Well, I think that there is the point of how this process of, for instance, in theory, in developmental niche construction and developmental systems, biological systems, that could probably respond about this connection between the ontogenetic and phylogenetic dimensions, because indeed they are quite interrelated. But indeed, I think the inactive part is also needed to understand how these different levels of autonomy in the constitution of organisms are also at work in this development. And indeed, what I was thinking in my talk, in this reference to norm development, it was like going also back to the biological part and understanding, for instance, how there is a work of Barandaran and Moreno that refers to how, for instance, E. coli bacteria not always responds to sucrose if the environment offers like low levels of sucrose and high levels of lactose. So there will be a different expression of genes that will refer to different processes of developments and coupling also with this gene material coming from phylogenetical processes. So yeah, I think there are also interesting work there to do.
Excellent. So just a quick follow-up question from Peter there. Actually, Peter, you can come back in live if you like, and then this will be our final question.
Oh, okay. Just following on the discussion of norms. So you're thinking of norms sort of in the same, analogous to von Forster's idea of eigenbehaviors, sort of an organism environment or social environment, attractor basin.
Well, yeah, in some way, I am thinking about precisely. I make this view of norms in terms of the dynamical system of this generation of these attractors basins. Oh, that's what would be the dynamical modeling of the existence of those norms. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I know that we were about to finish. Can I say something?
Very quickly, maybe? Yeah.
Yeah, so I already have a definition of norms that could help here, in which patterns set the normative criteria to evaluate adaptive behaviors. And this combination of an adaptive behavior that can err, that you can select something that's better from worse, and some patterns in which it can be evaluated beyond the mere interaction can work here. So we can combine these two things, not only attractors, but also the very possibility of making a mistake. But yeah, we talk about it.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good. Well, we have certainly kept you long enough, Miguel. I am very grateful for your time. I'm grateful for the talk too. I look forward to the book, the publication of it, and the continuation of the work. It's great.
Thank you very much, Marek. Thank you to all of you for being here.
Thanks to everyone, and hopefully we will see you next month for the December 2022, the final 2022 ENSO seminar. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.